follow on from there?
We can start now. Just welcoming all of you. Thank you for all of you who's here. I'm not sure that I know who's around except for those having their camp on. So we are now on our second webinar series. The presenter this time is from Indonesia, Dr. Rafa Makin. She's from the School of Graduate Studies, State Islamic University, Indonesia. The topic will be on Islamic-based social work intervention, the case of Yogyakarta. I will now pass it over to Tracy to conduct the show, our series.
Okay.
Hopefully it will be an interesting and enlightening one. Thank you. Welcome again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Hatta, for opening our webinar series and your role as president for PASWAY. Maybe I'd like to say a little bit more detail about our presenter, Dr. Rafa Makin. She's at her university. She is the co-founder of the Centre of Disability Studies and Services. She obtained her doctoral degree from the School of Social Work, McGill University in Canada in 2011. And she teaches various courses, including social work theories and methodologies, contemporary issues in social work, and disability and ageing. While her research area is mainly disability, she's also involved in various research and policy developments in other areas such as homelessness, women, and gerontology. So we're really pleased, Dr. Rafa Makin, that you accepted our invitation to present today. Just for our participants here, in terms of the technology, you'll see a little a chat button down below. If you would like to now or throughout the presentation, just click on that and you can write maybe your name and where you're connecting in from. We can see some names. We can't see everyone, but we'd love to know who has joined us here today. This session is being recorded and it will be made available on the PASWAY website as well. So the presentation will be for about 20 minutes and then there'll be opportunity to have questions and discussion. And you can do that either through the chat facility, again that little chat bubble down the bottom, click on that and then you'll be able to write your message, or you're able to with the numbers that we have, you'll be able to just speak any questions or comments that you would like to make. And so with that, warm welcome everyone. Again, my name is Tracy Mafileo and I'm from Massey University in New Zealand. And it's my pleasure to now hand over to our guest speaker to hear about her research and her work. Thank you, Dr. Rafa.
Thank you, Tracy. Good day, everyone. My name is Rafa. I'm coming from the Sunan Kalijaga State Islamic University, Yogyakarta, Indonesia. And today, I'm going to talk about Islamic-based social work intervention in my city, Yogyakarta. Before I start the discussion, I would like to express my thanks to Dr. Hatta as the president of the PASWAY, and my colleague in the PASWAY. I'm not sure he's here, but hopefully he's joining us. Professor Adi Fakhruddin, who's encouraging me and inviting me for the discussion. Also, Dr. Rasma Selio for the invitations. I'm going to start my presentations by highlighting why I started the study. I think this is important as part of the clarification who I am in the study. As an Indonesian educated in the Western social work, received a training from the McGill School of Social Work, I'm quickly interested in the issue of indigenization and authentication of social work. And then getting back to Indonesia, I started teaching at my university, Saad Islamic University, and being exposed to the idea of what we call in my university as integration and interconnections. These values is an effort of my university, Islamic University, to integrate between Islamic studies and social and humanity studies. So these two challenges and tasks before me encourage me to find my way into two aspects in the study. One is, I think, it's the quest to authenticity. I would like to find how the authentic and cultural practice of Indonesian social work in one hand as a way to make sense of the field, or to make, to contextualize its social practice into Indonesian culture. And then the second is to integrate social work as discipline into Islamic studies, where my university is focusing on. So this is the context of the study that I have. Please, next page, Dr. Joseph. So in the case of the issue of religion, I think we've been witnessing the debate on the appropriateness of incorporating spirituality and religion in social work practice. And I think, although it's now become very much debated or discussed, but I think it was not until the 80s that discussion is about religion received a growing scholarly attention. And I think it started in 1999 that National Association of Social Work specifically mentioned the issue of individual and religious belief and practice as a part of the practice that we as social workers should adhere. So when I was confronted by the debate into the literature, to be roughly speaking, I was quite surprised that the discussion of religion become a debated issue, because growing up into in Indonesia, where religion become very important part, I thought everyone sharing the same value. And then when I read the books, and then there is quite a heated debate, I start to realize that this is something that I need to be aware of. Next. I think I don't need to discuss this slide in much detail. I think we need to be, one thing that I noted from this is as a social worker, we are trained and to understand and spiritual life of the client as a part or important part of the interventions. I think this I would like to emphasize from this slide. Next. So what about Indonesia and social work in Islam? I think if we look back to the literature, we are able to find pretty good literature on Islam and social work. Al-Krenawi and Graham, for instance, in 2000. And then I enjoy very much reading the Ragab work on Islamic perspective on social work. And one thing that all this literature share, I think, is the understanding that Islam for a Muslim, for it Eden, is comprehensive and all-embracing way of life. So Muslims, social work with Muslims need to be adapted according to Muslim value. I think this is the message in the literature. So coming to the issue of worldview, Indonesia is one of the countries who has the biggest Muslim populations. We are a big country with more than 280 population, and 80% of the population are Muslim. So Islam has become part of our world value, and then the issue of ontological and epistemological become very important. I think how Islamic values shape client and worker behaviors, problem and solution. But the thing about Indonesia is because Islam has been part of a very embedded and important part of the culture. Sometimes, Islam is being taken for granted in the sense that as a practitioner of social work and also academician, sometimes we're not really aware, our own value. Or in another way, I would like to say that the effort to find the authenticity of Islamic work need to dismantle this worldview in Indonesian social work practice to understand actually how social workers perceive religion and then this religion is applied in social work practice. Next, please. I would go back to this slide later on, but I think also what we need to be understood from this slide is that another thing that we need to highlight concerning the issue of religions and social work practice is also the issue of value clarity, as mentioned by Edward and Furman in this study. The very deeply ingrained Islamic values in Indonesia, for instance, sometimes hinder some workers to be aware of, the possibility of her or his imposing her own value, or even, the institutionalization of the value within the institutional practice. I think this is very important, and we're gonna go back to this slide later on. So we can move to the next slide, please. Well, the objective of this study, I have to mention here that in the beginnings, my research is actually not only Islamic perspective and practice, but then later on I found out that most of the institutions that we are visiting and most of the social workers that we are interviewing are Muslim. So it's only fair that in the end I changed the title and also the focus on Islamic perspective in this of religion. But the objective of this study in the beginning is to explore how social work perceive religious-based intervention and what kind of program activities being provided or held with, in the institution setting. And also, I would like to understand how social worker perspective on the question of whether or not the religious approach is compatible with the modern social work. Next, please. This is not a very huge study, actually. Only starting the study with 10 social workers in the institution and the area of 3 areas, which is substance abuse and then domestic violence and disability. And this is a thoroughly qualitative study, so there is no quantitative involved in this. The main participants of the study are social workers in the institutions, but I also have to highlight and underline here that what we define as social worker, it could be very wide meaning. That include what we call as pembina agama or guru agama, which is like Islamic and religious counselor in the institutions. So in other words, the word of social worker is become very, usually very loosely defined here. Next, please. So I'm going to talk about the findings of the study. I would like to start next with my statement before that as a Muslim country with the biggest Muslim population, so we cannot avoid the fact that Islam is a worldview of most Indonesians. So it means that when we talk about social work practice, we have to dig up into the 3 aspects of the practice, which epistemological, ontological, and methodological aspects. In this vein, so religion or Islam is used as a method of interventions, as well as tool intervention, but also ethic and value based. I think this whole three component is also pretty much observable in the case of my study. Next, please. Yes, next, in more practical perspective, I think we will see that religion, in this case Islam, is become a very important part of the rehabilitation program and curriculum in the institutions. Religion or Islam is also used as a main approach of the interventions, both as psychological or even legal intervention in some cases, and from assessment to termination. So religion has become pretty much important part of the practice. Next, please. This is perhaps one aspect of the study that we might call epistemological aspect. It's become very obvious from the very beginning of the interview that when we talk about clients and then about the problem, we see that religious explanations is become a way of a worker to define the problem. So workers, and I think as well as client, although I'm not including client in this study, is defining their problem by connecting it with defined explanations. And of course, using Islamic term or language to explain that. So the word takdir, for instance, meaning destiny, takdir is Arabic word meaning destiny, is pretty much used when workers define and try to understand why the client have a problem. In more cultural perspective, because we're talking about Jogja is the center of Javanese civilization. We also have a very similar term, although it's a little bit different. The word of Nrimo, which is acceptance, is also become very much the worker narrative, understanding the problems. At the same time, I think worker also see that problems held by client is rise from or caused by the violation of Islamic principle and values. Let's get to the next slide to see what I'm talking about. So in disability rehabilitation, in the disability aspect, for instance, the worker is pretty much showing or demonstrating the belief of what we call in disability studies as moral explanations or moral model of disability. Well, as we know that many cultural beliefs share similar belief concerning the cause of disability, that disability is seen as a result of bad deeds or the violation of cultural and religious value and principle. While medical and even now human rights approach has been added in the current social practice in disability rehabilitation concerning disability in Indonesia, but the moral explanation continue to be observable and become part of the worker narrative. In the slide, for example, I mentioned that one of the sentence explained by the worker is that some clients here are being blind because they're on deed, they are drinking too much, and they are violating, religious law, because as a Muslim you're not supposed to be drinking, and as a result of, their drinking habits, or they become blind. This is the exact word that I got from the narrative, and explaining or demonstrating what I might call it earlier as a moral model of disability. The same thing, the next slide, with the issue of substance abuse. a worker in the drug center, for instance, said that most of the clients who become a drug addict because they are forgetting the ground. I put the ground in the equation here. What they mean is, according to the worker, the client are enjoying too much the material world, success, money, the hectic life of professional life, and fail to remember that there are other things in life. So the word, the crown here, I think indicating the balance between material and spiritual world. And I think the worker also use religion as a clear reference when they're talking about the crown here. So these two examples of the workers' statement indicating that, what I mentioned to you before, the way workers define the problem is not very much far from, a religious interpretation or divine explanation. They connected the problem with, the violation of religious and Islamic principles. Next. And my second part of the study is I would like to understand how actually the workers receive religion or the role of Islam in the interventions. And next, please. I presented here in a very loosely way 5 roles that according to workers being played by religion. First is tool of behavioral change. The second is that the natural healing system. And then the third is new ethic. And then as a counter discourse and as a universal principle. This 5 spectrum is not equally observable, but I think is also quite visible in the case of Yogyakarta. I'm going to start with the next slide in terms of the form of Islamic-based program owned by institutions. So the 3 settings that I'm working on, first is disability and substance abuse. I'm focusing specifically to the state-owned institutions. So I'm visiting the social worker in rehabilitations center of substance abuse and also disability. And as you will see later, there is quite significant difference in terms of the way religious play between the state-owned institutions and then religious institution and also non-state institution. So I'm going to show you what kind of Islamic programs is running in the rehabilitation institution, both in substance abuse and disability. So usually Islamic subject is part of the curriculum in the rehabilitation program. So we have here activities like weekly or even daily religious classes and covering a lot of themes, various themes, from knowledge about daily ritual is part of the very important aspect of the curriculum. Things like praying or salat in Islam, and then Quranic reciting and others. The second practice is also involving zikir or incantation, meaning you incantate the word of Allah and Rasulullah or the Prophet many times, and then praying together, or we call it jama'ah, and then night praying or tahajjud is become also very much practiced in most of the institutions. Next. So I mentioned before that one of the role of religion seen by client is a tool for behavioral change. In the case of substance abuse, for example, Islam and religions in general is seen as a medium for mental and psychological restoration. So in this case, as I mentioned in the slide, I think religion is a medium for mental and psychological restoration. So the worker encourages clients to live spiritually healthy. So the healthness and the wellness of spirituality and also physically as well is become a key to get back to the community and return to their social functioning. So the worker, which is called in this setting as pembina agama or religious counselor, is become catalyst in restoring the mental disturbance of the victim or the drug addict. Next, please. I quote here one of the worker statements concerning how they see the problem and also how the religion play role in the intervention. She said that it's very difficult not to say that these clients are not wrong. They are drug abuser. I know that we cannot blame them. However, in whatever perspective, they will be considered as doing wrong. So it's hard to say otherwise. But with religion, a client might be aware that what he or she is doing is wrong. And this is where the entry point is. Only when client aware and admit that they are wrong, then he or she wants to change his or her habit or correct their behaviors. This is a step to success. I saw some client were crying after praying. So this is demonstrate how worker believe on the importance of religion as the entry point to develop a client awareness of the problems and the negative behavior that they're showing, and by developing the awareness of the client using the religion, so it's become a point of success. Next. At the same time, this also another narrative shown by worker in drug abuse, in substance abuse. He noted the possible ethical conflict between religions or Islam in this case and the social values, traditional values. For example, in the case of Jama'ah prayer or prayer together in the mosque or in the institution, it's become part of the daily activities of the clients. This is a way of disciplining the client. So if the client is not joining the Jama'ah, usually they're going to get a punishment. One of the workers said that it might seem unethical from a traditional social work practice, but he said that the Jama'ah is a way of disciplining, and that's also a way of progressing and changing the client behaviors, without which the client will be able to restore his mental and psychological situation and would not ending the program. So this is very interesting. Actually, there are also a lot of possible, also not related to the issue of religion, but the possible conflict has been told by worker issue like confidentially in others. But in terms of religion, I think this is pretty much what they think and what they feel. Next, please. So if in the beginnings, previously we're talking about religion or Islam as tool of behavioral change. We're now talking about Islam as natural healing system and universal values. I think this part is this aspect or this role is mentioned by those workers who work on very Islamic non-state institutions. We call it in Indonesia things like Pondok Tetira or Tetira Zikir. This is our Islamic-based interventions for substance abuse. And of course, in this case, so the program that they are offering to the client is mostly very much Islamic healing tradition, including wirid and dhikr, and then prayers, and also the daily ritual consists of set and prayer and dhikr that is commonly practiced in Sufi order. Next. The basic assumption of the practice in this kind of setting, in this Islamic setting, is the balance between micro and macrocosmos, yin and yang. So in the assumption that developed from this intervention is the body is the microcosmos. Problem is believed to be resolved from the imbalance between micro and macro. So the healing is aim or doing to return the balance. So the micro and macro here is defined as, you know, spiritual and material, soul and body, woodly and non-woodly, wood, as I think pretty much everyone define in this sense. The use of Quranic or Arabic recitations and also I don't know what we call it in English. It's like they use like Quranic alphabet and other, and it is believed to guard the individual from a bad thing. So the malaikat, by using this zikir and wirid and also Quranic and Arabic method, it's believed that the malaikat or angel is guarding this individual and guard and heal the body. I think that's the practice that they have been. So there is a notion, next place, of what they call as the doctor of the heart, or tibbul qulub, and this is one of the praying that usually or commonly practiced in this natural healing or Islamic healing system. Next. So the practice that they're doing in the Pondok Tetira or Islamic institution is the client will be reciting zikir together with the religious counselor for 30 minutes before or after the 5 time prayers. So the practice is intended to remind the client of the God, and then, you know, of course the aim is also to make individual very close to God as the ultimate balance. They also apply, or one of the activities that has been offered to the client is what they call as taubah shower, or they need to shower in the middle of the night on the very early of the day. So the shower is meant to victims so that they feel clean. So the water symbolically cleans both soul and also the physics. Next. So this is one of the worker narrative in this Islamic institution. Based, as I mentioned to you before, that the practice in this institution is very much based on the Sufism practice. So the Sufi believe that each organ of the human body has substantial function and it affects another. Therefore, each individual needs to maintain this function. An individual will get sick because, or have a problem in this sense, you know, whether it's physical problem, social problem, because his organ does not function well, or there is a disequilibrium between body and soul, material and spiritual. Next, please. Some of the worker in this Islamic setting also call their approach as universal, because it's an attempt of someone to indulge in the attribution of the universe. So in other words, he or she must keep the balance of the universe. So this is still relying on yin and yang cosmos and microcosmos and macrocosmos principle that I mentioned before. Next. Next slide. Yeah. And this is the third role that has been believed by the workers. This is coming from also another or different setting, which is non-state government, mostly, you know, community-based social work practice. So in this setting, religion is seen as they offer new interpretation of religious text and seeing religion as a counter discourse and as well as a new ethic. What I mean by here is we can see in the next slide. So I'm talking here about the Center of Domestic Violence run by women organization actually. In this setting, religion is seen as a part of the problem, meaning that in some cases, the domestic violence happened because of the interpretation of Al-Quran, which is the source of Islamic teaching, and Hadith or the Prophet tradition, which they see as justifying the cultural view that woman is inferior to men and men is superior. So there is some concept derived from the Quran or Islamic legal tradition, concept like nuzuz, which is wife disobedience, and then some of the verses in the Quran like rijalu qawwamuna 'ala nisa, meaning you know, like man is superior than women, and also the issue of inheritance and others. This, in some perspective, has been, or in the worker perspective, has been justifying the cultural view that woman is inferior than man and become a cause of the domestic violence experienced by many women. So having this case, now religious or interpretation of religious texts become very much important as a solution or as a model of interventions. Next, please. Next slide. So Rifqa Anisa, the institution that I'm working with, is claim itself as a feminist Muslim, so believing that Islam is respectful to women. So they observe that misinterpretation of religious teachings, you know, the things that I mentioned before, sometimes become justifications for husbands to beat their wife for the purpose of disciplining or educating. And in Rifqa Anisa perspective, you know, this is very wrong because Islamic value is emphasizing justice, wisdom, and positive behavior. So the word beating in Quran doesn't have to be interpreted as physical beating, but should be interpreted in different ways. And this misinterpretation of the verses of the Quran has rendered to the fact that majority of women suffer from domestic violence are typically those defied as the obedient wife, while the husband are so pious Muslim with good Islamic education. So based on these cases, then the worker in Rifqa Anisa, next please, highlighted, next slide, yeah, highlighted that the religious approach is not specifically addressed since it has embedded in the interventions. But what they mostly doing is basically Islamic reinterpretations used as a counter discourse of the practice. So to conclude what I said, that there is three very distinctive practice from the three institutions or three types of institutions that I'm focusing on, and all of them showing different practice and also different role of Islam in the process of interventions. So, so to conclude this presentation, I would like to just highlighting how the impact of my study in terms of practice and also the issue or the idea of authenticization of Islamic social work. The first one I would like to highlight is, as I mentioned to you before, the need to dismantle the worldview of the Muslim or social worker, while at the same time also incorporation the epistemological and ontological aspect of the issue, meaning that, of course, we need to understand the worldview of the client and workers. And the worldview here is, as I mentioned to you before, including how workers define the problem and also define the solutions. And the second thing that I would like to highlight is, of course, the value clarity. How, as a worker, as a Muslim worker, for instance, we are understanding the client perspective, and we're not imposing our own values, because sometimes it's very difficult when religion and Islam become the majority and become a mainstream perspective, become a mainstream worldview. Then sometimes we feel that there is some other client who might be not sharing the same or similar values and beliefs. The issue of reflection, I think the self-reflexivity is very much important in this case. Regarding the issue of authenticization as a conceptual framework, I don't think that I'm able to finish my discussion here, because it's also very much related to the issue of how, the issue of Islamization of knowledge and integrations as part of the knowledge concept that we need to address, and I don't think I would be able to share it in this particular time. So I'm going to conclude my discussion with this, and thank you very much for everyone's attention. Hopefully it's understandable. Thank you, Tracy. I'm giving back to you.
Many thanks, Dr. Rofa, for that very interesting and insightful presentation. I really enjoyed learning about the results from your study, and it really invites us to think about